Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily rule. It's been a couple of months, so you know what that means. Time for another entry into the good old Blood Moon rulings playlist. Amy controls Blood Moon and a Hydro-Man, Fluid Felon. What are Hydro-Man's characteristics during Nick's turn? Alright, so the first thing to observe is that Blood Moon does not affect Hydro-Man at all unless Hydro-Man is a land. Hopefully it shouldn't be too controversial to say that. Blood Moon literally says it applies to non-basic lands. So if Hydro-Man is not a land, Blood Moon does not affect it, just like Blood Moon's effect doesn't apply to grizzly bears or any other random creature. Next, let's take a look at how Hydro-Man's ability is set up. It has a triggered ability that triggers while it's a creature, and that triggered ability sets up a continuous effect as it resolves. The continuous effect it sets up in the game, and it lasts until Amy's next turn starts. If Hydro-Man were worded something like Warden of the Wall, where the continuous effect that changes its stats resulted from a static ability on that card that Blood Moon could take away, well, that would add some extra complications that we fortunately do not have to deal with here, although I'm sure the comments section will welcome any discussion of the hypothetical scenario where Hydro-Man's wording was different. So let's take a look at what all that means for the situation from our original problem statement. First off, during most of Amy's turn, there won't be any continuous effects acting on Hydro-Man that want to make it a land, meaning that it will just be a creature and Blood Moon won't affect it. Hydro-Man's characteristics will be exactly the same as what they would be if there was no Blood Moon during those times. During Nick's turn, and during the portion of Amy's turn after the Hydro-Man's type changing ability has resolved, there will be two continuous effects that want to change Hydro-Man's types or subtypes. Both of these apply in Layer 4, and just to add a little bit of extra challenge to this situation, both of these continuous effects have secret effects that do extra stuff that isn't noted on the actual cards. Alright, so whenever we have multiple continuous effects, the first thing that we need to do is determine what order that they apply. Usually this is based on layers, and for that reason we know Hydro-Man giving itself the ability to tap for blue is going to be the last thing that happens, since ability adding and removing happens in Layer 6, which is after type and subtype changing effects apply. Unfortunately, layers are not sufficient to settle this whole thing because both of the remaining effects apply in Layer 4. Normally we would use timestamps to break the tie, but here we can see that making Hydro-Man into a land changes the number of objects Blood Moon's effect applies to. This means Blood Moon's effect is dependent on Hydro-Man's and will therefore apply afterwards. Now, every time I talk about dependencies on this channel, I get a ton of comments talking about how needlessly confusing they are and how it's a horrible system that needs to change. And I think a lot of that comes from selection bias. Most of the stuff that makes it to my channel is, well, by definition, at least a little bit confusing or non-obvious. After all, if there's no reason to expect the answer is something different from what it actually is, what's the point of making a video about it? So anyway, I wanted to point out that situations like this are exactly why dependencies exist. If we just went off of the timestamps, then unless the Blood Moon came into play after Hydro-Man's ability had resolved, well, that would mean Blood Moon would have an earlier timestamp, meaning it would apply before Hydro-Man became a land, meaning that you could have a situation where Hydro-Man was a non-basic land, but it was not affected by Blood Moon, which doesn't make any sense. The dependency rule keeps us from ending up in this kind of situation. A lot of situations involving dependencies follow this same sort of pattern. It's just that we don't hear about those cases because they don't have the same clickbait factor. Getting back to the question that we're considering, we now have almost everything that we need for an answer. Hydro-Man's effect applies first, making it a land. If you play Hydro-Man, you would know that it now looks like this. It doesn't explicitly spell this out on the card, but because the effect does not say it's a land in addition to its other types, well, that would overwrite any other existing card types, i.e. creature. Because Hydro-Man is not a creature anymore, it stops being an elemental and a villain too, since those are creature types and not land types. It's still legendary because legendary is a super type, and those are independent of what card types a permanent has. Now we're ready to apply the Blood Moon, and when we do that, Hydro-Man will end up looking like this. No, I'm not jumping the gun. When you set a land's subtype to a basic land type, that would cause all the abilities from the text box to go away and get replaced by the ability to tap for the appropriate color of mana, even though ability adding and removing normally happens in Layer 6. Remember, the continuous effect making Hydro-Man a land results from the resolution of a triggered ability, and that triggered ability has already resolved. So this would not affect anything about when this continuous effect starts or ends. And speaking of Layer 6, let's not forget that same triggered ability also set up another continuous effect. So when Layer 6 rolls around, Hydro-Man will gain the ability to tap for blue. Now, since this is a later layer than when Blood Moon applies, that means Hydro-Man will not get this ability taken away like its other ones were. And there you have it. This is the final characteristics of Hydro-Man after all continuous effects have applied. Ready for a challenge question to test your understanding? This one was actually suggested by a viewer. Thanks to Emma for this one. Amy controls Hydro-Man, Fluid Felon, and passes the turn. On Nick's turn, he attacks with Eluge, the Shoreless Sea, and puts a flood counter on Hydro-Man. What are Hydro-Man's characteristics after this happens? What are its characteristics during Amy's next turn? Alright, so there are a couple of important differences in between this question and the previous one. The first is that, unlike Blood Moon, Eluge doesn't only apply to non-basic lands. It applies to whatever got the flood counter, whether it's a land or not. Now, one consequence of this is that Eluge does not apply to Hydro-Man only during Nick's turn. It will attempt to make Hydro-Man an island all the time, no matter which player's turn it is. And I said attempt because that's not actually going to end up happening. Now see, just like how Hydro-Man cannot be an elemental villain if it is not a creature, because those are creature types, you can't make it become an island if it isn't already a land, because island is a land type. So if the ability that puts a flood counter on Hydro-Man resolves before the ability that makes it into a land, well, the Hydro-Man will not be an island. There probably should be a dependency between these abilities, but there isn't. Changing the order such that Hydro-Man's effect goes first does not change what Eluge's effect does to Hydro-Man. What it does is try to turn Hydro-Man's land type to island. Changing the order might affect how successful Eluge's effect is at doing that thing, but it does not change what the thing it does is, because the Eluge ability only gets set up once, whereas the Hydro-Man ability gets a new timestamp every turn. The Hydro-Man will probably not be an island most of the time. I guess Nick could use the Eluge's ability targeting Hydro-Man again, which would create a new Eluge ability with a later timestamp, but this doesn't seem like the best thing that he could be doing with that effect. Another kind of interesting thing to note is that unlike Blood Moon, Eluge says it makes the land into an island in addition to its other types. Now, that's not obvious from just the card text, but this too has ramifications on the results. Such wording does not cause the land to lose any of its existing land types, and also, for some reason, exempts the land from having all of its abilities removed the way that they were in the Blood Moon example. This, of course, is only moderately relevant here, since Hydro-Man does not have any abilities printed on it that affect anything while it's in the land form. Now, I suppose I couldn't in good conscience have all three of these cards in the thumbnail without considering what would happen if they were all in play at the same time. Now, just to make things easier to keep track of, I'll say that someone has used a magical hack to change the word island into forest on Eluge. This won't change how it interacts with anything, but it will make it a little bit more clear what effects are causing the results that we see on Hydro-Man. For this question, I'll choose what I think is the most interesting ordering of the timestamps and leave the discussion of other alternative orderings to the comments section. We'll say that Blood Moon is in play, then Amy plays a Hydro-Man and passes the turn, then Nick attacks with Eluge and turns the Hydro-Man into a forest. So there are three type-changing effects to contend with here. Blood Moon's has the earliest timestamp, but it depends on Hydro-Man's, so it will wait until after that to apply. Hydro-Man will turn itself into a land, and then Blood Moon will turn it into a legendary land - mountain. After that, Eluge's effect will turn it into a forest. Because this is in addition to its other land types, the final type line will be legendary land - mountain forest. After all of this, in layer 6, Hydro-Man will give itself the ability to tap for blue. It will, of course, also be able to tap for red or green because it has the basic land type associated with those colors. And that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another daily ruling. Until then, I hope you have a great day.